Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm so happy to see family and more family, and family from Tiger Strikes Asteroid, our artist cooperative. I feel like Erol is also a family member of Tiger Strikes Asteroid. I think we're going to just talk a little bit about the show, and then I'm so excited about the performance because I've known Erol since 2017.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really until today, when I was coming in, that I heard Erol playing the cello, although I've known since day one that you played cello. Yeah, we met in 2017. I've been part of this cooperative since 2016, 2017, which is a network. Chicago's one spot, New York, Philly, LA, now Greenville, South Carolina. So we are taking over the world. But Erol was, part of those early years too. We got to know each other, and we really, I think, clicked, connected, and we've stayed in touch since. And what I was always intrigued by, not just you as a human, but so prolific and working. And when you and I would see each other and talking about the work that you were making in the studio, pandemic happens, we don't see each other.
Yeah.
I feel like the last time I really saw you before the pandemic was at Expo Chicago in 2019.
That's right.
Yeah.
To visit you when
Yes.
we were setting up.
Actually, we were breaking down.
Oh, I was breaking down.
We were breaking down the booth. No, you did. You came by, and it was so good to see you, and you were talking about the work that you were making in the studio, and then, the world turned upside down.
Yeah.
And, we still stayed in touch, and, you were telling me about what you were working on, and, and I think organically through talking about that, when I was thinking about the time that I had here to program something in the space, I was really, kept thinking about you and what you're working. Yes. And what I liked about this opportunity that I thought would be great is that we do exhibitions, but we also do residencies. And so I knew you would activate the space, come in and do a lot. It did. So you did a residency, or use this as a working space for 4 weeks. And when I came in here, I was floored. Literally, you had stuff on the floor, and you took over the space. And when we started talking about what was going on in this space, is you talked about bringing in things from your other studio, things that you had that weren't really employed yet. And I think one material that we talked about, or you pointed out, was linoleum, which is present in several of these pieces and is just really informs a lot of the work. So what I want to hear a little bit about is, because the show is called Lore, which mirrors your name.
Yes.
But also, I think, is the starting point of, the show starts with a story and continues with storytelling. I don't think there's an end point. This keeps going. So I'm not going to start in chronological order asking you about these works, but really, I think the piece that is really the rising arc of this story is Aquaforia, which is positioned over there, which is when you come around the corner into the space is the first piece that you see. And for me, it's really transfixing. But I want to hear a little bit more about the pigments, the scale, and the story.
Yeah. So thank you, Teresa. Thank you, TSA. Yeah. But so this piece spiraled out from me. I was working on it. There were two separate pieces that I worked on separately. And it's not until I got into the space and pieced them together did I realize that the forms kind of wanted to continue into kind of painting. I moved into my studio in the West Loop, and I didn't have nothing to work on. Like, I had no idea what to make, and I was running a lot near Lake Michigan and collecting a lot of water. Like, collecting water. Before that, I was working on a farm back in the burbs, so I was just coming out of this whole idea of foraging and harvesting. I constantly wanted to harvest things. So at this point, I was harvesting water from Lake Michigan. And I had these buckets in my studio. And I had this large canvas, the blue one I'm talking about on the bottom. And all I was doing was mixing this blue pigment into the water, the Lake Michigan water. And at the same time, I had gotten a phone call. My family had a really horrible loss to our family. We lost my cousin to Lake Michigan. He got swept away and his body wasn't able to be found. So at the same time of me working with this water, there was this like immense loss. And I'm the oldest out of all my little babies, and I like see my little cousins as all babies, you know. So that was a big blow to me. So what I was doing to grapple with that was, you know, I was coming in, I was pouring and leaving the studio, coming back, pouring, leaving the studio, and that's what I was doing. So I had this whole surface of just blue. And I was like, oh my god, it's just a blue pouring painting, whoa, great, you know? And then I started to see these forms in it, like these faces and these hands, and the spills started to take on these like forms. And I started to throw myself into the pigment then. And I eventually laid down on the surface and began tracing and outlining myself wherever I fit within the spills. So I was kind of puzzling myself in, kind of like almost like, I was thinking a lot like a hair weaver, like under and over, under and over, under and over, when I was making these pieces. And that's like quite like apparent in these pieces too. I'm constantly thinking about like that tempo of things kind of going forward and backwards and overlapping over each other. And yeah, so like the tracings became a way for me to kind of work with my reflections. It became a way for me to kind of work with like the auric, the like outside arena of me, you know, the part that's kind of like not the interior world, but the exteriorness of me. But then it kind of entering into this interior story, mythological realm in a way, because it's existed in this surface that's a painting outside of me. And that's when I started to think about lore and mythological and storytelling, and that's where I led into scrolls, because scrolls is kind of like this continuous story, you know, it's something that can constantly be unrolled, but there's also something hidden, you know, and it's quite practical too, you know, I've worked around large paintings and they take up so much space, and I feel like scrolls are very practical. But yeah, so that painting for me is, you know, it's like 3 years old, it's been sitting in my studio and I've just been living it for that long, you know.
But continue to evolve when you came in.
When I came in here, yeah.
You were also pulling together things that were in your other studio and then thinking about them in a context of not just the space, but the stories that you were thinking about too. And I think the piece that's straight ahead, this is Iris, correct?
Yeah.
This is the oldest piece in this presentation, and this was actually done before the residency. And it floated in here, and when I came in here the first time, it wasn't around, and I came back, and it was sitting over there. Yeah, and then Erol was talking about everything but the piece, and I was like, okay, what is that painting? What's going on here? And it's presented right now like as a square, but we also talked about how it could hang as a diamond. But I think this one is not immediately what you see when you come into the space, but it's right to the left of you. And sometimes we read space from left to right. That is a starting point about you using touch on surface. And the iris itself, the white paint that's around the center point is they're your fingers, right?
Yeah, they're my fingerprints.
So that's your gesture of thinking about touch. So I want to hear a little bit more about it, but I also am interested in hearing about the kind of the back and forth, because it was here, it wasn't in the show, it was back in the show.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's the first piece of paint. touched me, and I used to be super controlled, and I was just thinking, about form, and like, but thinking about it moving though, it's like when I started to get back into like this piece that I was going to play and getting back to writing music, I realized that that piece is actually a music note. Like it turned into a music note to me. Because I've been playing here and I've been, writing here, and then I've been kind of glaring off into that point. And I was, even how the forms, everything kind of goes to that centralized like sphere. And at the time I wasn't thinking about music, I wasn't thinking about I was going to be painting, putting paint on my body and smudging myself against the surface either. I was just enjoying not washing my brush and letting the color kind of bleed into the next piece, bleed into the next color. And I was also thinking about that little tiny white point that's right in the middle of the piece if you look, and everything kind of relating to that tiny point. And I realized that's kind of what I do when I compose. It's like I'm like relating everything to this kind of centralized tempo or this centralized note or series thereof notes. But yeah, it literally, in the nick of time, I eyed it, ran out of my studio, grabbed it, and then I bought it in here, and I was like, okay, universe, like, thank you. Like, that's full circle, literally, yeah, that does make sense for it to be here. Like, the space called it, the work called it,
Yeah, it really did, and I'm glad you trusted your gut, because it showed up here, and I was like, let's talk about it.
Yeah, trust in my gut even when I do these body prints too, when I literally have paint on my gut.
Yeah, and so then we got to talk about these two pieces here, the arena pieces, because this is really where you really amplified it with your body and using it as a stand for a press. Yeah. And, these pieces are also like collaged on one another too, so there's like cut-ups and cutouts too, there's body pressings, this is just going vertical too, even though this is linoleum. I love the move of the linoleum extending over the vent, which made me think of domestic spaces where you've got linoleum going right up against the vent for your central air. So in a way, I know it's about your body pressing and that storytelling, but I also see in this part too, like scores and stanzas as well. So this, and then the one behind there too, like there's, I think, a lot that's talking about, for me, you as a visual artist, but also as a musician too.
100%. I think when it goes to domesticness too, like I grew up in like the kitchen, like with my grandparents, my great grandma, and my family. Like the kitchen for us is central to just everything, like where the food is, where the laughter is, where the secrets and all the details come out, So I was really enamored by hanging out in the kitchen, and washing dishes and taking on chores that my grandma would give me so that I could become an active member. And I remember I always used to look at my grandmas and them clean when they would sweep, and thinking like if they just had paint on the end of that broom, like it would be making this glorious masterpiece, because, and they do it so meditative too when they sweep, like it's just like this slow process, to maintain the kitchen. And I think that's when I started, that's why I use flooring, because flooring for me then places me back in home. It places me back in a space where it feels familiar, and I can then move above these surfaces with my body and dance above them, and they become musical scores then for me at the end. They're like these things that I can then read and play. And that's not till this residency that I kind of realized that I could make a score with my body. I had never thought I could do that. I just thought I would just write a little bit here and there, or just abstract some old master's work notes that they wrote, but not till here did I realize. And I think that's because the diamonds are there, and some of the diamonds pop out to me as being like legible notes. And but yeah, I'm really excited about this new chapter, and that's what's so exciting about the residency, is it gave me that space to do that.
I like the flow. You really, I think, took advantage of what was created, putting it together, the space, letting, generously me into more of the stories that you've told me and haven't told me too. And I think for those who are here as well, folks who have been to the show before, folks who are part of the family, and we know that family informs what you make. From folks who were here, Ethan fixing the wall, Grandma
oh my
was
God,
on the floor.
she was on the floor,
like this is a family endeavor. It's a family endeavor. It informs the like stories, but it also informs, okay, the structure here, the apparatus, like to make this all happen. And so I think that's also something that I appreciate that you pay homage to and demystify, that sometimes in the contemporary art world that we tend to overlook or downplay, but really honoring the, that familial, that lineage, that system that is here to support, to challenge, to tease.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe before Erol plays his score, his original score, are there any questions or just thoughts to add to this? And of course, it doesn't have to be at this moment either. All right, well, I'm very excited because, like I said, I've known Erol for years, and I'm excited to hear the score.
So I could give like a little precursor to this.
And I don't know if you want people to come closer to and sit closer.
It's up to you. They can kind of just stay there. And maybe close your eyes and turn around.
It's fine too. We can use our ears.
So like growing up playing cello, I was a horrible student. Like I was a good student. Like I was horrible and good. Okay, so like she would always point to a note and ask me, what is that? A, E, F, whatever. And I never could tell her exactly what it was, and she would be so upset because I just could never do it. And that goes back to now I found this way. It's like writing with my body or just writing a little bit more abstractly with it. And the score I found out when I write, I also chop up my score. So I like write on various pieces of paper and then I chop them up and kind of piece them together into this one object that kind of becomes then my score. And I realized even in this space doing that even my scores are now becoming like these objects, these things. And I love that correlation too. And I realized I'm really trying to put myself in these like stanzas, really, like trying to, because I grew up playing music and I didn't grow up doing art, painting. Music was my thing, so I grew up between lines. I grew up between stanzas before I grew up before a blank space.
Those scores as objects will be in the next show.
The scores as objects.
Just like the title. So we're playing in the next show after you.
There we go. Yes.